Circular Museum is a series organized by MoMA and Art 2030 to discuss how the art museum can and should address the challenges of the climate crisis. This summary video draws together highlights from across season 1 of the series that consider subjects like exhibition production, funding, climate control, carbon footprint, shipping, values, collaborations, and experimentation. The series is chaired by Carson of the MoMA Ambas Institute and myself, Luise Faurschou from Art 2030. The conversation featured museum practitioner and artist, including Francis Morris, Tino Segal, Joanna Burton, Joss Klein, Olafur Eliasson, and Yuko Hasagawa, Hans Ulrik Obrist and Tabitha Rezer, Gitte Ørskov, Jeppe Hein, and MoMA's Lana Hum, Eliana Glicklich-Cohn, and Jason Smith.
Why is art, or even the art museum, an important place to address the climate crisis?
So I think we're highly visible organizations. We're trusted. We represent large communities of the most creative people on the planet. And therefore we have a responsibility to the people power of those artists. We are, for the most part, not all of us, public institutions. And we have a commitment to, and I don't like this word, serve the public, but therefore we have a social responsibility. We are absolutely embedded in our communities. We are owned by our communities, if not actually, we are morally and ethically owned by them. So we are as responsible to respond to climate emergency as our governments are.
I am thinking about what's the most effective mechanism to utilize the institution to be. And I think, I want to bring as many people into this museum as possible. I want to bring as many different people into this museum as possible. And to do that, I think we have a slightly different function that, again, and I'll use the words awareness and action, but I'll also lean into this word education, which doesn't get unpacked enough.
But yes, we have a climate crisis that is so complex that we probably should address climate justice as an issue from within museums, and that sort of complexity that I just addressed, that there is evidently not an opportunity here where we can be completely perfect. I'm going to make mistakes probably many times, but I can at least, to the honesty of my heart, say I'm trying the best I can.
Why is it that art museums are even suitable places to address the climate crisis or sustainability in the first place? Yeah,
I think so. In the broader sort of spectrum of society, we have various sectors and various areas, and we broadly say private sector, there's public sector. There's also a cultural sector inside of the overall civic sector. Inside the cultural sector, there are a number of different platforms which are maybe working as, should I say, fact-checking, or should I say, keeping the values up to date with the times in which we live. They don't have being re-elected like a public servant, or the profitability is not the main motive, like in capitalism or market economy. So that means there's maybe a higher degree of trust that the conversation that is hard to have other places, having difficult conversations, is maybe safer to have within cultural networks or cultural systems or art institutions for that matter. So I think the art institutions is not a place where you step out of the world into seeing some dreamy version of the world. No, it's a granular microscope, or it's a binocular, it's a higher resolution place. And evidently, to face something like the crisis made of many crises, the so-called climate crisis, it is a recalibration of proportions that needs a lot of inward looking and reconsideration. And there is, in modern society, not a lot of priority of reconsideration. There's rarely any spaces. There's the university, and maybe if you're a faith person, you can go to church, which is reconsideration in a very direct, centralized version. So, but art museums, I think, is a pluralistic, non-centralized, and highly, should I say, motivating way of reconsider reality, or reconsider the reality production.
Embedded in it, the processes of observation, of interpretation, of concentration, of experience. But this question of, but I wonder how that all this changes a little bit with the kind of imperatives of the climate crisis. You know, are we still a place that allows for many different opinions?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that everybody has to address it. So it's question is, you know, why wouldn't, you know, artists and institutions not address it? It's something which everyone should do and has to do. And I really also think more than that, which is why your question is interesting. I also really think that artists can make a very important contribution, you know, to these discussions, and I think we should always think about this possibility of bringing art into society, you know, which is something which so that art doesn't just happen in the institutions, but institutions can somehow facilitate for art, you know, to enter more society. And I think in a way, particularly today, where everything needs to be reinvented. No, I mean, the word pivoting is one of the most used words in relation to the climate emergency, that so many, you know, things have to be completely reinvented, and radical change is needed. You know, artists are leaders in that.
We need to recognize that over the next 5, 10, 15 years, we're going to begin to think, or we are already beginning to think very differently about certain things that we once called traditions, that we might want to rename habits, because actually they're centuries old, not millennia old. And I'm just thinking about some of the habits, conventions that sit under our museums, like that it's good to collect, that we need to collect, that we need to ever build larger collections. The idea that we need, for example, to preserve objects, tangible heritage in perpetuity, forever, at a time when our planet is unlikely to be here in perpetuity. There's a kind of out of syncness in the way we're beginning to think ecologically, in the way we still are thinking about institutions and collections. So we have a tradition of looking after objects in our collection, caring for them so that they continue to exist forever, and maintaining them where we can as new. And I just think those things are now really questionable about whether that's something we can afford to do, because they are really the things that drive emissions, are massively burdensome. You know, so is it worth it?
It's like understanding the elements outside of us as a part of ourselves, you know. And if you truly see like water, the ocean as yourself, you know, you wouldn't like throw plastic or things or completely desecrated, like, you know, or the soil, if you really truly saw the soil as a part of yourself, you know, and like this dissociation from humanness to everything else, you know, allows room for dominion, violence, exploitation, you know, because we see it as other, you know, or all the hierarchies between humans allows, okay, I'm better than, I'm different than, so I can exploit you, you know, because it doesn't matter, you're not me, you know.
I think museums activate emotions and feelings. And I think this is where we have to hit everyone around in this universe. It's because if we really go into our heart, we really know what to do and how to do things. But there's so many things on top of that feeling, which is just like whatever we have, all our issues in our lives. But I believe that if we can get deeper in and activating these emotions, you will have that as a gift from the museum within your heart and your feeling, and you're going out. If it's a good feeling or not a good feeling, it doesn't matter. Everything is welcome, I think. But if you can activate people's feelings and emotions to take with them, and this is where art is so strong, because it's not in your brain, it's not it can be intellectually, but it's also much more physically. And this is where I think it's so strong. So it's a very strong tool to use. And this is where the museums are putting these tools into a kind of a structure for people to navigate in, because sometimes, of course, public art or whatever is different. It has other options, I would say. But now we are discussing a museum's context, I would say.
I think that just overall, museum is a public space. And we are public space in a very special way, because what you face museums is the cultural heritage. You face history. You are confronted with a long history of art that has developed on different crises within our history. And if you look into the history of art, you see most of the artworks that we carry with us today are works that are created in a time of crisis, like the First World War, the Second World War, and so on. And I think we have a responsibility there, not to be, guiding artists or instrumental in a way that we want to direct, do a climate friendly work of art, but we need to open up and go into the conversation with the artists and say.
Gustav again was in my office and said, we need to go beyond event culture. We need to go beyond this idea that there is an exhibition. We need to think about longer durational kind of formats, about longer durational horizons. Fernand Braudel talks about longue durée, and there is a great book by Roman Kajanik, who reminds us in his book, The Good Ancestor, how to think long-term in a short-term world, that we need to think about long duration, because it is the short-termism that is so harmful to our environment. So art has to reflect that, and long durational works will take on an increasingly larger role in society. And of course, it leads also to the idea that maybe exhibition can produce works which then become part of a longer durational framework.
Artists are always the people that, and we're an artist-founded museum, artists are the ones who always ask the good questions about what an institution should be and help form its future. MoCA's been that space since its inception in 1979, with a work like Chris Burden's Exposing the Foundation of the Museum, where he literally dug up the floor of the Geffen in order to symbolically, but also materially question what a museum is and what it shows, how it operates. So as the artists lead the way, they shouldn't come up with the solutions, but they are helping us, I think, find our way into new structures that are open-ended and extremely exciting, and keep me very hopeful about the space of the museum, not only as a place that allows for a dialogue no place else can, but also that brings people together that are maybe unlikely interlocutors a lot of the time, or that's the hope.
Yes, there's so many artists who are no longer so much interested in exhibitions. They're interested in many other things. And I think we need to take this very seriously, need to think how we can actually change the institution.
We categorize our work into 3 main areas. The Scope 1 and 2 projects encompass energy reduction and mechanical efficiency projects. The Scope 3 projects encompass materials, waste, operations, and our day-to-day practices across museum departments. Many of our initiatives require the museum and its staff to do things a little or a lot differently. This can present some big challenges. Some people embrace the changes, and some not as much. People are used to going about their day and their business in a certain way. Altering that can be hard. For example, if you're used to serving meat regularly at the cafe or at events, and you take it off the menu for a day or reduce the amount it appears, is that going to bother your patrons? Or are they going to embrace that change immediately because eating less meat typically has a lower carbon footprint? Probably somewhere in between.
We have had, I had mentioned some historic efforts that we've made. So in our building of environments, we typically reuse the metal studs in a gallery so that a set of studs could have a lifespan of several years in different wall configurations. However, in an effort to use that same tactic towards sheetrock, which we found more challenging. We developed a system of evergreen and modular walls. So the evergreen walls are walls that never change in an exhibition design, and the modular walls are movable partitions that we can deploy to create a degree of mutability in the exhibition design. Another strategy is to develop a vocabulary of standardized casework so that we can use this casework, giving it a longer lifespan anywhere in the museum, and it would still fit in with the design of the exhibition. Also, Eliana mentioned donations of exhibition furniture and staff giveaways. We have employed tactics of closed loop recycling so that when we do recycle objects, they go back into either the manufacture of other building products or into another art application. That's an excellent question. I'm so glad someone raised that. We have found that the sustainability effort does require more time, but our production periods are fixed, and we haven't kind of increased the amount of time when one show comes down to when the next one opens. And of course, we want to keep the museum open to the public as much as we can. So that's the reason why we haven't adjusted the production periods. But I think that the work that we're finding, the time that we're finding, the extra that we're finding to sustain these efforts are not during the production period. It's all the time that the carpenters spend outfitting the shelves so that nothing gets damaged in the furniture, or making carts to kind of move things safely from one part of the museum to another, or the efforts that the art handlers are taking to wrap everything so that it doesn't get damaged in transport. It's the time that we kind of iterate through the modular wall design so that we do achieve what the artist or curator is hoping for, without doing the expedient thing of we're just make it exactly the way that someone wants it to be, that we have to be a little more creative about how we can strategize over how to use our resources. We're staying under an 11 skids of sheetrock per year. So how do we use those 11 skids the most effectively to create a changed environment? Those are the things that are a little more time consuming. I think as designers, I think one of the benefits we found is that it's helped us focus our attention on other things than the inch here, the inch there of wall movements, and it's taken focus away from just fetishizing the importance of that, inch. And I think that we've all learned as designers, especially at the Museum of Modern Art and working with artists, to be exacting, and that was a goal, to be as exacting as possible. But I think having a system of modular walls has really liberated us to kind of focus on where those inches matter, maybe in the install, or maybe where are those resources going.
Well, one of the things that we realized is every infrastructure of a museum has an end of life span. And so it's inevitable that, there are sunk costs in making investments into the infrastructure of a museum. Putting aside the sustainability, there's also a risk mitigating need of a museum to protect its collection. You can have pieces of equipment stop operating and then not be able to maintain the environmental conditions that are required to keep it in conservation limitations. And so there's almost this in tandem where you can start to have an infrastructure capital plan, but start making decisions that are more sustainability minded. If you're looking to achieve sustainability goals, you may end up replacing some of that equipment earlier than you might have intended. But there is a lot of argument that there is a good payback for making sustainable choices.
When you look at most large or mid-scale European, North American museums, they are sitting on icebergs, and the tips don't get bigger, but what sits under the tip gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So we're all working with collections that we literally will never, ever be able to show. We will never catch up with the accumulation. I think we need to start thinking about the use value of what we acquire. And by use value, I mean not its use value in storage, but it's how we use the work in the museum. And very simply, we need to shift from the temporary exhibition, which in essence is bringing a large number of works into the museum on a temporary basis from all over the world for a temporary enjoyment, to actually using the work that we spend most of our time researching and collecting. And I think we can do that. We have, Tino, your work is in our collection. It's not on display. Why are we not activating it? But I think what I wanted to say, that use value is about the value of the experience of the work in the space of the museum. It's not about its exchange value. The exchange value in terms of the marketplace is completely meaningless in a museum. And I think there's a lot of confusion around financial value and use value or intrinsic value. But I think there's shifts that we need to shift. All museums, not just Tate, we need to shift into a mode of buying less and depending less on collecting as defining who we are and what we do. Can we move to a model of sharing? Can we distribute our collections? The inequalities between museums within the sector, between nations, between cities and towns is just as big and scary as the inequalities between people. So why are we sitting on this stuff? Why aren't we finding a way to share the resources that we have? And isn't that a model for how we need to be thinking about responding to the planetary crisis that we have? We have a global north and a global south, and one half of the world is suffering and the other half is still benefiting from the investment in empire and extraction of 300 years. So this could be a model for how do we take responsibility for ensuring that there is a just future for everybody, not just for our own museums.
Climate control, is, to my knowledge, like more than half of the energy consumption of a museum. And it's something which is very recent. And as far as we found out in our research, possibly even built on a misunderstanding. It's not actually necessary. The Vatican to this day doesn't have climate control. And most museums didn't have a climate control to the 60s, 70s in Berlin, to the 90s, even end of 90s, so lots of conservators tell me climate control is also dangerous, because what if you have a power cut, then suddenly you have a drop in climate conditions, and that's actually what's the worst thing for paintings and sculpture. But when we started this trying to focus on climate control, on the energy, which is the largest factor of energy consumption, the thing was also mostly for contemporary art, because I'm a contemporary artist. Luise works with contemporary art. Francis, I think, also worked a lot with contemporary art, and most contemporary art is not that it's not that fragile. It's often installations which anyway get unbuilt, since minimal art, video installations, my case, live work, it's nothing which actually needs 20 degrees Celsius and 50% humidity.
Okay, Jeppe, we want you to do a show at Moderne Museet. We don't want you to transport any artworks. You're not allowed to collect art that you previously made. And by the way, you won't have a defined space, because this whole project liberated so many energy into doing things differently. So we said to Jeppe, okay, how can you as an artist change the experience of the visitor of being a museum visitor? How can you challenge that role that visitor normally enter when entering an art museum. So that was how we approached Jeppe. Okay, no shipping, no defined space. So what do you want to do?
Small watercolors with breathing exercises. So I discovered when I did a small line with a pencil and I exhale at the same time, I start to feel calmness. I start to feel good in my mind, start to relax, my heartbeat start to relax as it does now. And it become bigger lines on museums wall when I start to feel better. And one day in 2019, with a lot of therapy, a lot of yoga and meditation, Art 2030, Luise was calling me saying, do you want to be a part of this project, trying to combine your artwork with this some of the 70 SDGs in a way of trying to show climate change in your work. And because I've been doing and working with this Breathe With Me project, we did this project at the United Nations 2019 at the Climate Summit. Inside the foyer, we were inviting people, political people, minister, president, young climate activists to inhale the world. And while you're exhaling, you're doing your line of breathing with blue paint. And as long as you exhale, you will do that. And we'll do 4 of those. Feeling connected, feeling the air was connecting us. I'm always saying our life starts with an inhale. It ends one day with an exhale. But in between those breaths, we have certain life, some shorter, some longer. But one thing is connecting us. That's our breath and the universe we are breathing in. And if we are aware of that, I think we can connect with us in this kind of world and understand each other much better.
But when I look to my international colleagues, I see the same movement that I mean, the art market can't be standing outside the question of sustainability and the question of climate changes.
We, don't build new exhibition architecture for each show, but that it always recycles exhibition design of previous shows. The other one is do it, as a model that we use instructions, and that's something which has a long art history. It appears in conceptual art, it appears in the Tropicalia movement in Brazil, it appears in Fluxus very strongly. So we can build on these traditions. And then, of course, what does it mean, if we work on installations? And there, of course, there is the possibility that exhibitions can actually produce works which afterwards are installed somewhere permanently. And I would say last but not least, if we go back to a more conventional exhibition of basically objects, because that also still exists, some artists make objects, paintings or sculptures or drawings, then of course, I think it becomes very important to start to think how we can actually also there drastically, reduce the carbon footprint. And for example, we try to do this now also with historical retrospectives at the Serpentine. So for example, we did a Hervé Telemaque show the year before last, and Hervé Telemaque is the extraordinary painter from Haiti who was Paris-based for the last couple of decades of his life, and many of his works were actually in French collections. So we decided to cluster the exhibition, to build it out of loans only from French private and public collections, from the artist studio, from a lot of French museums, and it could all be brought, in one lorry, basically, to London. And of course, with Thomas Saraceno, it's a similar situation. We still have the Thomas Saraceno exhibition called Webs of Life, where Thomas starts from a question, which is in the context of the environmental crisis and the need for a just eco-social energy transition, can the socio-economical depth of the global north be equitably taken into account? Can technodiversity and biodiversity interact differently? Can the privilege of digital memories over ancestral memories be overcome? So these are some of the questions. He invites us to join the Spider's Dream, a space with codes of another ritual, and really inviting us to change our habits. Now, what happened with this exhibition was also very much connected to this aspect of, going beyond event culture, thinking more about the longue durée, because Thomas basically changed the entire energy system of the Serpentine. He encouraged us to basically have solar panels on the roof of the South Gallery where his exhibition happens. We're now also going to install, because of his this experience, the solar panels on the North Gallery. So the film on the Aeroscene flight, which is the centerpiece of the exhibition, was completely powered by the solar energy.
This exhibition here was now in 2020 was the first exhibition where we at the studio and myself went full on into seeing how radicalized could a whole exhibition from A to Z be, especially considering it's on the other side of the world. So it was in Japan, and we made the show in Berlin. So a number of many discussions were in the preparation. And this particular slide here actually is one of the works from the show. This is a photo from the show. The exploration of the center of the sun, it's called, and the power for this particular lamp here sitting in an exhibition is a solar panel sitting outside the museum that you would see entering the exhibition. The interesting part of actually starting a sort of ambition on an exhibition, we have done at the studio a number of attempts to work with climate related to exhibitions and focusing on different things. One of the great things was, of course, to find out how to best collaborate with the team on site in Japan. The by far most climate challenging situation with working as an artist like myself, showing around the world, is in fact the logistic around the transport. This picture here shows the journey from the artworks, which in the old days could have been flown on an airplane, which would be the worst, could have sailed also, which would have been the second bad. And here we have a journey of the map when you send artworks by train. This is through Germany, Poland, Russia, China, with a ferry from the Chinese border over to Japan, and then from there to Tokyo. It's the idea was to take every aspect into the show and carbon calculate, and also in other ways sort of monitor the sustainability. And the fact that we could actually send the whole exhibition by train was somewhat of a surprise to me. See, now the transport going from Germany, Poland, Russia, China to Japan, we did this similar kind of drawing machine. The ink ball dries out in a couple of hours. So we made a different type of ink sort of drawing machine at the studio, a little sort of car, if you want, that could drive around. And in every crate with an artwork in it, we made a round piece of paper in a box, and that you see on the left hand, the stack of boxes. So every artwork had a little, so to say, a little diary recorder, a seismograph for what happened to the artwork. On the right side, you see at one of the drawings, and this is then the titling piece. This is a pool of water in the middle, a somewhat architectural piece. This was completely locally produced in Tokyo, preventing sending materials that were already at hand locally. So we made very precise drawings, and the MOT did really a fantastic job producing it, an amazing local producer. And it was to the millimeter, exactly like the test we have had and done in Berlin. And as COVID happened, I couldn't go. I did not install my own show. I remember we sitting 4 o'clock in the morning in the studio in Berlin with the amazing team in Tokyo, who went at great length installing the show over Zoom or over the telephone. And I was sitting there, and with my work, like a big work like this, it doesn't really, it's not about 5 centimeters to the left or to the right. You know, it's a huge installation that stands in the center of the room. So not being there is not as good as being there. Let's be clear about that. But it's not impossible. We have made in the studio where I am in Berlin with around 100 people. We have also become quite sort of pragmatic and specific. We allocated a studio team, like a sustainability team, and they have a budget. And we have short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. And one of the goals, for instance, is to have the studio building being completely carbon neutral in 2027. And then, of course, there's such a list of everything underneath that of what we do in the studio, you know, the carbon footprint measuring, the waste management, the certification of how to handle artworks in the future, so that we ensure that an artwork which is going to be installed elsewhere is not the contracting and allocating forms, allocating funds, just like in that economical system we work in, to also send that on to local environmental groups. And specific like team travel, logistics, transporting art, the collaboration, we choose collaborators who are environmentally more savvy and inspire.
It's more work for everybody, at least at the beginning. And so what's exciting to us and why I've been so fortunate to be working with an amazing council and advisors is, again, how do you sort of, the heart and mind question is real. How do you engage questions around environmental justice and sustainability as part of the museum's mission overall, instead of a kind of supplement to it? And I think we've been doing that again through getting people excited. We're forming a green team. We hired an amazing environmental and sustainability strategist, but having people own this work and not just have it mapped onto their jobs, but help them produce solutions. We have incredibly skilled people on our staff. And what's great is if you start asking them questions about how they think we can improve, they get excited and they want to do the work. But I do think that's always a challenge, which is overworked people being asked to do more work. That's real. And I think that's something, if we want to zoom out on what sustainability means, we have to take into account.